Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're time traveling back to the Renaissance. But we're not just here for the art or, the inventions. We're going deeper, like way deeper. We're diving into the beauty standards of the era. And honestly, after going through, like, Jill Burke's book, How to Be a Renaissance Woman, I'm realizing those paintings, the ones we all know, they tell a way more complex story than I ever thought.
It is interesting, though, right? Like, this era, it's so famous for its art, its science, and yet it also had this whole thing about appearance. People probably picture, like, those classical paintings, those gowns, and think, oh, those beauty standards, only the elite. But it's not that straightforward, not at all.
Okay, so, let's unpack that. What's in Burke's book that makes it, more complicated?
Well, one of the biggest changes in the Renaissance, knowledge was spreading. I mean, the printing press, books on all sorts of stuff, including beauty, were suddenly available to, way more people. It's almost like, the first beauty guides, they were being printed, shared around. It democratized beauty, kind of.
So it wasn't just, noble women trying to get that one look.
Yeah.
Everyday women were reading about hair, skincare, all that.
Yeah, exactly. Picture this. A peasant, right, selling fruit. But she feels this pressure to look a certain way, like a Venus-like appearance. That's the Renaissance for you. And it wasn't just vanity. It all tied into how they saw the human body.
They had that whole concept of humors, right? I read about that in the book. What was that about?
Okay, so Renaissance thinkers, they believed the body was ruled by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. To be healthy, to be beautiful, these humors had to be balanced. So everything, diet, exercise, even what you wore, it all played into controlling these humors to achieve this harmony.
Wow. So their idea of beauty was super connected to science, to medicine. Looking good wasn't just a surface thing. It was about inner balance too.
Exactly. And this idea that the body could be shaped, it's adaptable, it led them to do some interesting things to try and, mold their bodies.
Work in progress comes to mind. Because sure, we look back, we maybe romanticize Renaissance beauty, but they went to extremes, right? Corsets made of reeds, wood, even iron. Ouch. Talk about dedication.
It shows you the pressure they were under. I mean, they believed in transformation, but some of these practices, restrictive, even dangerous. Burke talks about how those tight corsets caused health problems, how some cosmetics were risky. It reminds us that beauty and, health haven't always been, on the same page.
It's like looking in a mirror, in a way. Even now with all our, advancements, people still feel that pressure to look a certain way. Sometimes they even do things that could be harmful. It makes you think, are we really that different from, Renaissance folks?
It's a good question. And as we keep reading Burke's book, there's even more to this whole beauty thing. One thing that really struck me was, race, how race played into Renaissance beauty standards. You don't often hear about that.
For sure. Reading about how black women, often, enslaved women, were present in these wealthy Italian households. It adds a whole other layer to the conversation about beauty standards.
It really changes how we think about beauty ideals then. It wasn't just being white, like Venus. The presence of black women, their features, how they were shown in art, like Titian's portrait of Laura Dianti with her black attendant. It meant they had to, confront different types of beauty.
It forces us to confront, the reality that beauty standards were influenced by power, by social hierarchies. It still happens now. The book even mentions a duchess, right? Obsessed with having a black servant, as black as possible. She even wanted her ambassador to find her one. It's a disturbing side to this, fascination with blackness, but also, how black people are marginalized at the same time.
Yeah, and it shows how much race played a role in shaping these beauty ideals. It reflected the whole situation back then. Beauty wasn't just a personal choice, It was tied to bigger social and political things.
It makes you think, right? These conversations about beauty, race, power, they're not just history. But one thing that really stuck with me reading this was how women in the Renaissance, they weren't just going along with these beauty standards. They pushed back, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Burke really highlights this, how women's voices started challenging the whole idea of beauty. We see it with writers like Christine de Pizan, Moderata Fonte. They were saying, hey, we have a say in how we look. And it wasn't just about, pleasing men.
So they were over that whole a woman's beauty is for a man thing. They were like, nope, we're taking back the narrative.
Exactly. They had their own ideas about what was beautiful, why it mattered. Like Pizan, she was all about Inner beauty, virtue, true beauty, she said, it came from character, intelligence, not just like your looks.
And it wasn't just writing. The book mentions this female gaze thing. Can you, like, explain that? It might be new for some people.
It's interesting. See, art history often talks about the male gaze, right? How men see women, represent them. The female gaze flips that. It's about women looking at each other, appreciating each other's beauty, setting their own standards.
And Burke found this, like, in the Renaissance.
Yeah. She talks about bathhouses. They weren't just for getting clean. They were social spaces, women from all levels of society. They'd gather, observe, share tips, They reinforce their own ideas about attractiveness.
Wow. So bathhouses were, like, empowering in a way, where those social rules, maybe they didn't apply as much. Women could just celebrate their bodies, their beauty, on their own terms.
Definitely. But we have to remember, even these places weren't totally free from, like, societal control. Authorities often watched bathhouses, worried about, immorality.
So even when women made their own spaces, there was still this, like, scrutiny. They were always navigating that.
Sadly, yeah. And this control, it went beyond bathhouses. Burke talks about how beauty standards, they were used to, control women's behavior, to keep those social hierarchies in place, like courtesans, right? Often admired for their beauty, their wit, but also criticized, seen as immoral.
It's that double standard, isn't it? Like, be beautiful, but not too much.
Exactly. And Veronica Franco, she's a great example. Venetian courtesan, amazing poet. She challenged those double standards, famous for her beauty, how she spoke, she even fought for women's rights. But even with all that, she was accused of witchcraft, died poor.
That's so sad. But it also shows how strong women were, resilient. They found ways to deal with these impossible expectations, even if it meant, facing consequences. It makes you wonder about all the stories we don't know, right? The struggles, the triumphs of women whose lives weren't recorded, like Veronica Franco.
For sure, and that's what's so fascinating about this time. For every big name, there were countless others, living their lives, dealing with these same things, leaving their own mark on history.
It reminds us, history isn't just the famous people, the big events. It's about the everyday lives of, everyone who came before us, their struggles, what they achieved, how they shaped the world we live in.
Right. And when we look at those individual stories, we get a much better, more, I'd say, complete picture of Renaissance beauty. It wasn't just about looking a certain way. It was about societal pressures, what they believed, what they wanted, and this constant back and forth between, like, fitting in and breaking free.
Sounds familiar, right?
Yeah.
Like this whole obsession with the ideal body. Did they have, like, diet fads back then? Exercise routines?
You bet. And some of them might surprise you.
Okay, so spill it. What kind of Renaissance workout routine are we talking about here? Did they have, like, jazzercise back then?
Not quite jazzercise. But yeah, they had their methods. Remember we talked about the humors? Well, they thought staying slim, it wasn't just, like, fashionable. It was important for keeping those humors balanced.
So it was all connected. Beauty and, like, being healthy.
Yeah, exactly. They thought certain foods, like heavy meats, rich sauces, they could mess up that balance, even make you sick. So lighter foods were better, fruits, vegetables, lean protein, pretty sensible stuff.
Makes sense. What about exercise? Do they have, like, Renaissance gyms or something?
Think more like leisurely walks, graceful dances, not so much lifting weights. They encouraged being active, but always, like, elegantly in moderation. The goal was to be toned, but graceful, not, super muscular.
It's interesting how different their ideal body was, right?
Right.
Compared to, like, what we see today. It makes you think about how those standards change.
Yeah.
How much is culture? How much is just, I don't know, what people tell us we should look like?
For sure. And like any time in history, getting that ideal look, it wasn't always easy. The book talks about Isabella d'Este, this Marchioness of Mantua. She was a total fashion icon. But she worried about her weight, tried different diets, even wrote to her friends about it.
It's like, even back then, people had body image issues. Makes you realize it's not just us,
Yeah.
Even someone like Isabella d'Este.
It's true. And to get that perfect look, they tried natural stuff, but also, let's just say, some more creative methods.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What kind of creative stuff are we talking about?
Well, we talked about cosmetics, but Renaissance beauty routines, they were like next level. They were DIY masters, using all sorts of natural ingredients. And get this, they even got ideas from alchemy.
Alchemy. Like turning lead into gold. What does that have to do with beauty products?
It's more about the ideas behind it. Alchemists, cosmetic makers, they both loved this idea of transformation. They thought if you did certain processes like distillation, you could, like, unlock the power of ingredients, make them stronger.
So it's like they weren't just, putting on lotion. They were trying to understand the science, the magic of it.
Yeah. It was a mix of science, nature, even a little mysticism. That's what's so cool about Renaissance beauty. Like, they believed certain scents, like rose, lavender. They could, create love, passion. That's why they use them in perfume, love potions.
So it wasn't just about smelling nice. It was like aromatherapy, but, Renaissance style.
Totally. And they weren't afraid to use, some pretty strange stuff. We talked about mercury, lead. We know how toxic they are now. But back then, in small amounts, they used them for, lightening skin, wrinkles.
It makes you realize we've come a long way.
Yeah.
But also that wanting to look good, to feel good. It's like a human thing. Always has been.
Exactly. The methods change, but we're still driven by the same things. Expressing ourselves, making ourselves look better, and trying to fit in with what society says.
Wow, this whole conversation's been, mind-blowing. What's the one thing you really hope people take away from this deep dive into Renaissance beauty?
That beauty, it's always been more than just surface level. It's about our values, what we want, even our fears. When we look at beauty practices from the past, it's not just like trivia. It helps us understand ourselves better and how much beauty really shapes our lives, even now.
That's a great way to put it. And on that note, if you're as into Renaissance beauty as we are, definitely check out Jill Burke's book, How to Be a Renaissance Woman. It's got even more fascinating details we didn't have time for.
And hey, maybe you'll even find some new ideas for your own self-care routine. Just maybe skip the mercury and lead.
Agreed. Until next time, everyone, stay curious and keep those faces glowing.